Okay, so when we're doing the assessments, as we were chatting about earlier on, we're thinking about that seriousness assessment. Is it any of these? Okay? It's our list. It's not up for interpretation. It's not up for anything else. We just check the list. Quite a simple assessment. Causality. Okay? I've had quite a bit of a chat about this. As I said, generally you will have a scale to make that decision on. Okay? But don't forget there are some things you can do, as we were chatting earlier on. You know, if a patient looks as though they're having a reaction to something, what would you normally do clinically? Would you not say, okay, we'll take you off of that? If whatever they were experiencing clears up, well, it was probably related to the drug. If it doesn't, and it carries on, then it probably wasn't related to the drug. Okay? You're making these assessments clinically, day in, day out. This isn't new, this isn't something difficult to do. It really is what your day job is. It's what you're doing anyway. The bottom two on that list there are generally the ones that will be defined as a reaction. Okay, so you've got quite a bit of leeway there. And don't forget that most of these trials are done on such a big scale that all of the possiblies, actually when you add them all up, that may bring the sponsor to term that as definitely. Okay? So don't feel under undue pressure to define something as definitely related. If you think in the back of your mind, actually, I'm not 100% certain that it's not, use that possibly option. Yeah? As I said earlier, whether or not an event or a reaction is expected, we need to go back to this list of reference information. Okay? Whatever it is that you've got that gives you the details on what is expected for that drug. And again, as I said, with our rash being slightly more heavy than we were expecting, that would be deemed as serious as well. Think about your trials. Think about how you're going to define this information when you come to write your own protocols. Okay? This is the type of thing that you have got some element of control over. Okay? Again, reverting back to the pregnant woman study, what are you expecting your group to happen in your group? Okay? Certainly I had one trial going back quite a few years now whereby they were motor neurone patients. It was expected that a proportion of them was late stage motor neurone, and you know, the outcome wasn't good. This was real end of life stuff. So actually, although death was serious, it was never reported in an expedited fashion. It was never seen as an emergency thing to report. Yes, it was recorded, but it wasn't necessarily reported urgently. Again, I've banged on a bit about expedited reporting. Basically, it's that new information again that we're thinking about. And it's having that raft of information as the sponsor organisation to be able to see when that new information is coming in. Some of the serious adverse events you may be able to exclude from expedited reporting depending on your population group. Certainly I had another trial relatively recently in a paediatric population, neonates, as paediatric as you can get, and the study was looking at a form of epilepsy. Okay, now these are very poorly children, very poorly babies, and actually because of that they were felt to be a vulnerable group. So the sponsor went down the route of actually saying, right, okay, we want every single adverse event recorded and reported into us. Which was fine. The sponsor organisation, unfortunately, that was making that assessment hadn't actually spoken to the doctors concerned, which always I find causes slight problems. So when they actually went out and started talking to the clinicians concerned, the clinicians are like, well, really? Because you might as well have another person stood beside us, because these are going to be happening like that. You know, we're not going to have time to write them down. You know, if you want us to do that, then it's not going to be safe for our patients, so we're not going to do the trial. So they actually had to then step back and say, right, okay, these are the important things that we need to know about. Okay, rather than everything. And again, it's going to be a matter of what happens and what is going to be needed for your individual trials. One size does not necessarily fit all. Think about your patient group. Think about your outcome measure. Think about what information it is vital for you to actually have. Okay? Especially if you are the person writing the protocol, and certainly for the terms of non-commercial research, you've got to be really, really clear on what is required for that. Timelines for reporting. Within the UK regulations, and I would imagine it's the same across most of the EU because it's in the directive, generally established 24 hours within the PI of becoming aware of the situation or aware of the event. It has to be reported in if it's serious.
The next step along the list of what we're looking at.
The regulations actually state immediately, but let's be honest, certainly, you know,
this is the one that can evoke that sort of a response on occasion.
Life happens.
But
and it's within you becoming aware of it.
It's not something to be frightened of. It's not a major issue. It's what you're there looking for in the first place.
Well, you could never report that within 24 hours.
So you suspect as an investigator that it's unexpected when you've checked all of your reference information about whatever it is.
The sponsor
it's serious because it's one of that list of things that we've got on our list of requirements.
Serious adverse reactions.
And it's a reaction to the drug.
Miss a letter somewhere along the line.
Yay, hey,
anything
big badge.
Fatal or life-threatening
we found some new information. Okay.
Anything else?
One thing to remember is that anything that is deemed to be unexpected, you've got to think about
why.
The level to which it's deemed to be unexpected.
Can we not tell them at the end?
So if your reference information says that this drug causes a rash or a slight rash,
you know, you'd only really know
and actually this patient standing in front of you in clinic is sort of red from head to foot, that's probably not a slight rash.
We have to report that in?
Therefore, that would be deemed to be unexpected.
Basically, this
because
is our
it's
new
not
information.
At a level that you would usually expect to see.
Set of information.
And again, you'd still be going down this level of unexpected
change the risk
and new information,
profile,
which is what we're in the business of doing. It's not scary. It's not frightening. It's
certainly
what
the fatal
we
and
want.
life-threatening stuff.
There's no point in doing it otherwise.
Have a real effect on whether or not that trial is safe to
Is everyone happy? Does everyone get that different types of terminology that we're talking about?
If something happens at the end of a trial.
A few people nodding slightly, so I think we're still with me vaguely on this morning.
6 months after they finish the
drug. So our process,
finish on the drug.
Okay?
So
as an investigator, as a chief investigator, as the person responsible for running your trial,
pregnancy, I think
you need everybody to be able to understand what actually happened.
Follow-up reports are required on
the principles of what they need to do are going to be the same, regardless of the type of study it is. Having said that, the individual protocol, as I said with our pregnant women study, will have an impact on what they're actually looking at.
You need to make sure that those follow-up reports are going in.
Seriousness is one of the things we need. Is it one of that list?
Okay, so that the sponsor
basically
has got good oversight.
Hospitalisation, prolongation, life-threatening, death,
safety profile,
congenital abnormality, all of that list we're thinking of.
Happy with that? Seems sensible thing to do.
Is it related or causality?
No
is it related to the intervention that we're actually delivering?
The relatives.
Are we expecting to see it?
You'd be keeping them.
That's what you're doing. You're defining whether it's new knowledge.
It's not new, novel, or different.
Whether it's relevant, whether it's new
knowledge.
Although
actually there probably will be a form.
This process is usually undertaken twice. It's undertaken by the individual sites. So your principal investigators in your individual organisations,
as I was saying earlier,
and it's undertaken by the sponsor
trials,
office.
The ones you've got control over, where
okay, so whoever receives that adverse event, adverse reaction report will redo that assessment
in an expedited fashion, and actually what's okay.
If it's a multi-centre study, I can see a question
coming as a list from your sites of what's actually.
If it's a multi-centre study,
work out how you're actually going to deal with that.
The sponsor obviously has more information coming to them than an individual investigator would.
How's that going to work in your organisation?
So they will be able to pick up
things
that an individual site may not, because they'll be seeing reports from more than one organisation.
How is that report going to come in? Who's going to see
why that assessment's done a second time.
Who's going to do those assessments? Who's going to acknowledge that it's been received? How's that actually going to work? Because that really needs to be written in your protocol. Okay, because otherwise how are your sites going to know what to do? I was working on a trial last year, and one of the first things that they asked me to do, all I was supposed to be doing was the monitoring. But I read the protocol through and I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. Quite interesting study, looks interesting. Statement in there, you will report X, Y and Z to the sponsor office. Slight flaw there, because that was where it stopped. There was no form, there was no fax number, there was no email address. This had gone through the regulators and had been approved. And I'm sort of going, you might want to put a bit more detail in there, or at least write a separate standard operating procedure or a document somewhere that tells them what they've got to do, because otherwise they don't know. So think about it when you're writing your protocol. It's important to make sure that all of your sites are aware of what is happening. I mean, it was resolved relatively quickly because, you know, the study was ready to start. So this one-page SOP appeared within about 15 minutes of me sending the email. So it was fine, it was sorted. But as a monitor, I couldn't allow that to start without the sites knowing how they were going to manage that. So do make sure you're thinking about it. Essential documents. Again, these are, well, basically everything. Yeah, let's be honest. As far as research goes, you have to maintain copies of everything. Okay. Definition is given for you there as the bits of paper that document the conduct of your study and allow the reconstruction of your study. Should you be inspected by your regulator, and for the UK we've got the MHRA there, it's what they're going to use to reconstruct your study. It's what they're going to look at to assess whether or not you've complied with GCP and are running the study safely. One key pointer to remember as far as any regulator is concerned, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. Okay? It could be in your head, you could know everything about every trial, every subject that's ever been through. But if it's not written down, it didn't happen. Okay, so please make sure you are documenting everything. TMF, or Trial Master File. I'm sure you will have come across these in your time. There are elements from ICH GCP here which you can look up and give you a full index, which I wasn't going to give you here because it's available. And to be honest, most organisations will have their own indexes that you just pick up and follow. So please don't reinvent the wheel. Please double check what your organisation already has in place and go with that, because they will already have done all the checks that everything that's required is in there. Okay? Generally, the minute you say definitely in this game, it changes, but generally, your trial master file shouldn't contain any patient identifiable information, but there are some occasions where that doesn't always follow true. But it's a rule of thumb. Why? Hopefully your offices don't look like this. I am hoping, vaguely, although I've seen a few that aren't that far off. I've seen some really nasty trial master files that were basically, it's in here somewhere. I know I've seen that document. I saw it yesterday. Yes, but it's not in the folder. I'm a horrible monitor. No, I'm not. Quite nice, really. I've seen some classics. I've seen one very large teaching hospital unit that I have actually been contracted to go into and actually reconstruct files where things weren't as they should have been, which was slightly scary, made me slightly nervous, I have to say, especially when I walked into their filing room. You know, they spent a lot of money on the nice rolling, it was great, lovely. The files were nice new folders, really looked pretty. There was nothing in them, but they had them, they were lovely. At the end of the day, if you file appropriately and you put things away as you go, yeah, I know, it's a bit of a pain. Nobody really likes doing it. Oh, no one's going to disagree with me, jolly good. It will reduce your stress, especially if you come to a point of being inspected by anybody, or somebody like me as a monitor comes out and goes, oh, where's so-and-so then? Oh, it's here somewhere. And then you're scrabbling around trying to find pieces of information, which isn't really doing you an awful lot of favours. It will reduce errors. It will, trust me. Just take that as read. I've seen it. It does make life easier for everybody. In some respects, if you've got updated versions of the protocol for a study and they're not in the file, how do the rest of the team know what they should be doing? You know, that's fine, great. Are you the person that's always going to be there? Are you there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? It may feel like it, but I'm sure you're not. Okay, everyone's allowed to have holidays. Everyone does get sick. If everyone can easily and quickly access the information that they need, your trial's going to run that much quicker, which will increase your productivity. It will increase your data accuracy. It will actually mean you get to your endpoint that much easier. There's nothing worse than getting to the absolute end of a trial and realising you haven't got everything you need, because that's a waste of money, time and effort, all of which are usually in relatively short supply. Investigator site files. That's what it says on the tin. It's one per site, one per investigator. If you're doing a single centre study, I've got a typo there, that should be TMF, not TFM. I don't quite know what happened there. You should actually combine the two into one document. Otherwise, you're in a position where you'll end up with protocol version 2 on your trial master file and version 1 on your investigator file. It just gets confusing. Just stick to one set of documents. Usually your investigator site file will contain the subset of information that's relevant for that site. So you wouldn't have all of the site approvals, certainly for a UK study. If you've got 15 sites in your trial master file, you'd have the approvals for all of those sites from the NHS R&D organisations, but you wouldn't send those out to all the other sites. It's not relevant for them. Similarly, you wouldn't have everyone's CV in every folder. Okay, you only have the stuff relevant to that site, but everything should appear in your trial master file. Yes, you do have the subject's medical records or the patient's notes as well to consider. That is what is defined as your source data. That is where all of the stuff about your patient should be held. Key thing to think about, and I think this is going to impact more and more over the coming years, is if you are doing drug trials, you are going to be inspected by a regulator. How do you give that regulator access to that information, especially if it's being held electronically? Some electronic systems for patients' medical records are being written such that you can't print the information. Does the system enable you to give an inspector a login to that system? Because the last thing you really want to end up doing is saying to the inspector, it's all right, don't worry, I can log you on. It's not going to go down well. Okay, sharing logins is really a big no-no. I know it happens. I know realistically it does happen. But publicising that fact to an inspector is probably not helpful. Your other options, if you can't manage that, process within your IT systems is actually that, yes, somebody does log on to the system, but they sit with the inspector and they actually take them through what it is they actually need to see. Because what they cannot be given is uncontrolled access to patient identifiable information. Okay, so that's your get out clause. But that's obviously going to have a time implication, because it's not just for your inspectors, it's for your monitors as well. Okay, so if you've got to have research nurses or admin assistants or whoever sat for a day beside a monitor while they're working, that's quite a big cost implication, because they can't really do anything else. They can't leave the room, they can't go anywhere because they're monitoring that person's access. Version control. Having done quite a lot of monitoring now, this is what will generally drive me completely insane, okay? Please make sure you're versioning stuff appropriately. However you choose to do it, stick to the same method, okay? In the UK, we have a rather odd amendments process. That's probably the simplest way of explaining it, and I'm not going to go into any more detail than that because it will make everyone else sit there and go, what? Because we're a bit odd at the moment. So I would generally say if you're working on a draft document, make it version 0. something. When it becomes a final document, it becomes version 1, which will often mean that actually when you come to ethics and you've actually finally got all your regulatory approved documents ready to use, you're actually on version 2 by the time you start, because often ethics will require you to make changes to information sheets and consent forms, etc. Okay? All versions need to be retained. Don't throw anything away. Don't do what my dear hospital up the road did a few years ago. You know, every single version of everything has to be retained. Not necessarily your draft stuff, although it's good practice to have an audit trail of how you came to the decisions of your final documents. But do make sure they are very clearly marked. The old versions that are no longer in use have a big black line through them so that nobody can pick them up by mistake. So I've seen that happen as well. File everything in date order. It's obvious, isn't it? Yeah? We put things in date order. Yeah, no, you're laughing. Yeah, that was a really bad day for me as a monitor. I went in, I was looking at somebody's files and thought, actually, this doesn't look too bad. It's in a folder. That's a good starting point. I'm having a good day and it's only 9 o'clock. Yay! Until I started to look. The correspondence section was the funniest. They'd filed everything in alphabetical order by the subject line of the email. There's a few people sort of sitting looking going, what? But that is what they'd done. And that was half of a lever arch file. It was at that point I went and got a very strong cup of coffee, because it was going to take a lot to sort that out. All of your files need to be stored securely, but accessible to people who need them. The general rule of thumb, certainly the phrase that will get bandied about at this time, is a staff-only accessible area in a locked filing cabinet. Well, that's no good if your research nurses, your assistants, etc., that are keeping your files don't have the key. Okay? No good it being in a locked filing cabinet in your office. That's not going to help. Needs to be available to everybody that needs it. Trial oversight. Okay. I thought that was quite amusing when I spotted that. We've got our wish of continuing to work unimpeded, and they get their wish of position of direct oversight at all times. That's not quite what we're heading for, but it does feel a bit like that on occasion. You know, they're there to help, not necessarily Big Brother watching your every move. What have we got within this? Important groups that we need to consider. Some of the terminology just to make you aware of. Trial Management Group, or TMG, the group that's responsible for the front-facing, patient-facing, making it work stuff. Okay, the day-to-day operations of this trial. You can see there from the list of people that potentially would be involved at this stage or in this group. They're the people that are doing. So that's what their responsibility is. They report into our TSC or our Trial Steering Committee and have an element of reporting into our Data Monitoring Committee as well. DMEX, Data Monitoring Committee, any number of other terms that they actually fall under. We've got a raft of different acronyms for them. But these are the guys that will be responsible for review of your data, keeping up to date and making sure that you're safe, your patients are safe, etc. The membership, because of this, the membership needs to be independent of the trial. They're the policemen, in some respects, checking that things are okay and that your patients are still safe. They need to have that level of independence. Has anyone heard of the Damocles Charter? It's not one I would necessarily say you would have done, but it's essential for DMEX to have a charter that they work to, and that's the template. So do Google it if you're actually in that position. Blinded trials, pretty much essential really. As an investigator, you can't have access, or you shouldn't necessarily be having access to unblinded information. So how do you know if that drug, device, whatever else it is that you're using, is causing a problem? You can't. You don't know which patient's on which. So our DMEX have that information and are actually able to turn around and say, hang on a minute, there seems to be a problem emerging. So they really are important. Okay, so we've got our trial management group, day-to-day running, our data monitoring committee, remote from the research, independent from the research, checking our patient safety in most respects. Trial steering committee are the group responsible for making sure it happens. Okay, the responsibility for the delivery of the actual trial sits with them. They will be the group that will agree the protocol. They will tend to be the collaborators on the project. They will tend to have an external chairperson. For studies that have got funding via the UK portfolio, the NIHR portfolio, which may not be relevant for some of you guys, the level of importance that's put on this is that actually this group has to be agreed with the funder because it's responsible for that delivery. They won't necessarily appoint them, but they want to agree that the actual makeup of it is appropriate. So they're the big bosses. They tell you how that's going to be run. No study is better than the quality of its data. That's what we're doing it for, isn't it? I know it's a bit of a pain filling out all these forms, but that's what we're doing it for. There's a number of ways you can ensure data quality, and you're looking at two different elements really. I've listed there for you some of the benefits of an electronic data capture system, so our electronic CRFs. We are moving much more towards electronic CRFs than paper data collection. But it's going to depend on your trial, it's going to depend on your budget, it's going to depend in research, it always depends, okay? So just take into consideration what's going to work for your trial. If it's a trial that's going to have changes within it, a paper system is easier to change than an electronic one. Because electronic systems, you try and change the actual filters and the actual composition of your data set and the questions that you're asking. That's a lot more difficult to do because it can skew data in the background. Paper's a lot easier to make changes to. What's going to work for your trial? Okay? One thing I will say, that as a monitor, the key, or if you ever need to do monitoring or you ever need to recruit a monitor, what you're looking for is someone that is experienced enough that they'll be able to go, yes, the site needs to sort that out, but actually they know they need to sort that out, so it's okay. And I'll go back and check. And that can actually then look at another site and go, that's wrong, and they don't know that's wrong. So that's more of a problem. And a monitor is also there to support and to help. I mean, I did think of putting a policeman on as the picture for this, but they're not. They're really not. They shouldn't be. They're there to help. They're here to facilitate. They're here to make the study work at the end of the day. They're not just no, sorry, you can't do that. Different types of monitoring, on-site versus remote. Your advantage of on-site, which I do tend to prefer if you can manage to, I mean, obviously it's financial implications is usually the telling reason that on-site isn't done. But on-site monitoring, you're there, you can see what is happening. You get a much better feel for how your sites are actually running. You get a much better understanding of the team. You can spot things before they become a major issue. Whereas your remote monitoring may not pick those up. And you won't pick anything up, potentially, until you get your lots of data come in. It's difficult to have the same level of oversight with remote monitoring as with on-site. But again, it can be costly. Whatever you do, given that I think the majority of you, for studies that you're starting out on, that you're writing your own protocols for, you're going to have limited funds. You know, if you're not, please tell me where you're getting them from, because I've got a few people I could push in that direction. Always try and make sure whatever you're doing, from a monitoring, sponsor oversight, what data you're collecting, etc., is relevant, is important for that trial, is going to add value. If it doesn't add value, why are you doing it? I've seen far too many trials whereby they've decided they're going to collect 40 pages of data every time the patient comes along, when actually, to answer their research questions, they need 3 pages. The cost is just going through the roof. I had one trial, which was brilliant, absolutely wonderful, was working really well. It was a rheumatology trial. And then about a third of the way through, they decided they wanted to start collecting information on smoking status. And I'm like, yeah, but half of your patients are finished. So you're not going to get that data on them. So it's not going to be statistically significant because you haven't got the right sample size. Oh yeah, but it could be quite interesting. No, stop, back away. You're answering your research question or you're doing another research project. One or the other. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't make it more difficult for you to actually achieve what you want to. If you're going out to sites and saying, oh, by the way, could you just do this as well? Well, they're already at full capacity doing your trial in the first place. If you keep drip feeding other things in, you're liable to end up with people going, oh, hey, just get through it, get it done with the least amount of accuracy that they can get away with. And that's not what we're in there for. Consider what's likely to go wrong. That's the biggest thing. If you can catch it before it goes wrong, you're in a much better position to actually solve anything as it happens. There you go. I've managed that with about a minute over, so that wasn't too bad. Anybody got any questions?